September the 11th, 2001 changed the life for everybody in this country. Changed the life of the world, actually. In the middle 80s, I don't remember the exact time, there was a movie that came out, Not Without My Daughter. How many of you remember seeing it? Sally Fields. It's a great movie. I'd encourage you, if you have a chance to get it this week, watch it, because it is a true picture of what Islam is. Well, the movie came out. It was about this American woman who married an Iranian. This guy had come over here and studied medicine prior to the fall of the Shah of Iran. And then Ayatollah Khomeini comes into power. Well, he wants to go back and see his family, and okay, we'll go back for a little bit. Anyway, he gets back over there and he ends up just becoming what Islam is. He beats the snot out of his wife, and she ends up well, I'm not going to tell you what happened. You'll see it. But so the movie was out. Well, at the time in our church there in Colorado Springs, we had a family who were Egyptians. They were Egyptian Christians, and the father had been a judge, and he was from a Coptic background, but very lovely man, loved the Lord very much. And I had him come over and give a kind of a lecture one Sunday night on Islam, and I never will forget what he said at the end. It was the Lord. Now this was when Gorbachev was in power, and perestroika and all of that was in place and so forth. And this is about 1988, and he made the comment. He said, what Western civilization has to fear is not communism. He says, it's going to collapse. He said, it'll always be there, but he said, that's not the threat to Western civilization. This is what he said. He said, the threat to Western civilization is radical Islam. 1988, this man said that. He'd seen it. You see, he grew up in Egypt, and his family left there to get out of that hellish situation. And that always stayed with me. I said, radical Islam, threat to Western, what? I mean, to me, the Muslims were guys who rode camels, and with their sabers and that kind of thing. And I'd studied Islam a little bit, and, some of the basic beliefs and things like that, but never grasped the depth of the evil of it. And since 9/11, 2001, I should say, God certainly has opened our eyes, and hopefully this week He will open your eyes to even some more things about Islam. So this seminar is entitled Middle Eastern History and the Emergence of Islam. Now you might wonder, well, why Middle Eastern history? Islam comes out of the Middle East, obviously. To get a grasp of what Islam is, it's very helpful to know the background from which it comes and out of the milieu of all the lies, the deceptions, the idolatry, and everything else that comes along with it. So, as we begin this, there are some things that need to be pointed out. Most importantly is the fact that Islam. Okay, introduction and the beginning of Middle Eastern history. Having at least a cursory overview of the history of the Middle East is very important to adequately understand the origin, theological, and cultural development and history of Islam, as it did not emerge out of a vacuum, but rather its inception goes back to the curse of Canaan in Genesis 9:18 through 29. You probably never thought about that, did you? This curse was a result of Noah's third son, Ham, committing an unseemly act against him while he was asleep, recovering from a drunken stupor. Now again, you might say, what in the world? Where is this? I knew this guy was a redneck, but he's really stupid. Why is he doing this? What's the purpose of all this? Peter Kreeft, who's a very outstanding Christian philosopher, teaches at Boston College, made a comment, and it ministered to me because this is what I've been seeing for quite some time. The beginning of the fall in Genesis 3, where basically Satan deceived Eve and said, if you'll eat this fruit, you'll be like God. She ate it, anything but God. But this desire for deification is intense. And the desire to be our own God, to name what's right and wrong, is intense. And it's a fascinating thing to observe to me that at the heart of it all is sexual perversion and sexual sin, and to be our own sex gods, really. Now, I thank God for His having delivered me from my heterosexual sin. Maybe you've been heterosexual, homosexual sin, I don't know. But that kind of sin is so destructive in our lives. We see it. Many of you have experienced it. I certainly have, but I thank God for His deliverance and cleansing. And we see throughout the Old Testament, we see this theme repeated over and over again. When you look at the material outside of the Bible, which is what we're going to look at here a little bit, you're going to see that it's there, it's rampant. It is replete with it. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, what I want to tell you is that at the heart and core of Islam is sexual perversion. Now, I'm going to hold back some stuff, but it's true. And everything, it's all about that. Now, it has a cover. It has a cover of religious activity, of going through religious, ritual and ceremony. They're bowing down to Allah, then they go blow up people. I mean, you see this over and over and over and over. But you need to understand that. At the heart of every false cult is some type of sexual perversion. Okay? It is very interesting to note that Noah's curse was aimed at Canaan versus Ham. You've ever noticed? When Ham did it, but he said cursed be Canaan and so forth. And there are a lot of ideas and concepts about that. We don't have time to get into all that. But why? Some people think, and I tend to believe, that Canaan was involved in whatever took place with Noah. This is just my own personal opinion, and others feel that way too. I'm not going to be dogmatic about it, but I think that something happened. Genesis 9:21 states that Noah drank of the wine and became drunk and uncovered himself inside his tent. The verb uncovered means that he was buck naked, as we say down home where I'm from. Therefore, it is thought that this might have set the stage for some type of sexually perverted act. In Genesis 9:22 we read, and Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, told his two brothers outside. The verb saw, which in Hebrew is ra'ah, can also be translated to get to know and become acquainted with. Ew. All right. For example, in Genesis 34:1, this same Hebrew verb is translated to visit. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. Now that word there to visit is the word ra'ah. That is, Dinah went out to see or visit the daughters of the land in order to get to know them in a more personal, experiential, and intimate manner, which for her meant conversing, not simply looking at them. So she went out there as a young lady to converse, talk, get to know them, that kind of thing. If I ask you a question, sir, what is your name? Patrick?
Patrick, here.
Patrick? If I say, Patrick, what I'm just explaining, do you see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Now, do you visually see, or what did I mean?
Do I understand?
Exactly. Something that makes real to you, that you can experience. Oh, yes, that's real. So that's kind of this idea. So the word for saw, that is visually, but also to understand, but also that it becomes a part of you, become acquainted with it. All right, next please. In Genesis 9:24 we read, when Noah awoke from his wine, he knew that what his youngest son had done to him. If all that Ham did was to glance at his father and visually see him naked, why would the verb had done be used in this context? You ever thought about that? How would you know somebody came and saw you naked? I mean, just looked at you. You wouldn't know that, would you? It would seem that the had seen would have been more appropriate. Okay? Genesis 9:23 also makes an interesting statement about the actions of Shem and Japheth. But Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it upon their shoulders, and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned away so that they did not see their father's nakedness. The word for nakedness in Hebrew is erva, and in English this would be translated pudenda. Now, do we have any children in here? All right. I don't want to get too graphic here, which is referring to the genital area of a man or woman. Okay, so he was buck naked, And I don't want to get graphic, so I'm sure that all that of his manliness was demonstrated there. And once again, this verse states that they did not see their father's nakedness. That is, they did not know nor become acquainted with their father's genital area. And I'm not trying to be gross here, ladies and gentlemen, but I want to make this very clear what was going on with Noah. It wasn't just that he saw that his dad's nakedness. I really believe that there was some type of sexually perverted act that was carried on. Now, stay with me as we continue. Back in Genesis 9:24, the word for knew is the Hebrew word yadah. And the idea of knowing that it is expressing can be that of an intellectual, mental, emotional, and spiritual awareness and understanding, but it can also refer to an intimate sexual relationship. For example, in Genesis 4:1, we read, "Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain and said, I have acquired a man from the Lord." He didn't say, "Oh, now I've met you," and all of a sudden, she gets pregnant. It doesn't come by water, drinking water, does it? The word for knew in the New King James Version is yadah, whereas in the NAS, the translation is had relations with. Thus, in Genesis 9:24 above, this could very, very, very well be referring to Noah knowing that he had been violated sexually. I personally believe that's exactly what occurred. I'm not the only one that believes that either. Many other people do. The Hamitic line, therefore, became the line through which, and this is a fascinating thing to observe, became the line through which pagan, idolatrous, sexually perverted worship began. Thus, even though the curse was placed on Cain and Ham was responsible for what took place, and there doesn't seem to be any repentance on Ham's part for what occurred. The consequence for that lack of repentance, therefore, appears to be a hardness of heart and rebellion toward the Lord, which resulted in an embrace of idolatry, self-deification, and religiously sanctioned sexual perversion. Nimrod, the son of Cush, who was the son of Ham, was the builder of Babel in the land of Shinar, which was ancient Samaria, and this is where the Tower of Babel was built. Now, Samaria is what we would call today where both Iraq and Kuwait are. That's where ancient Samaria was in that whole area, all right? Now, the whole earth used the same language and the same words, and it came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make for ourselves a name, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." Now here's what's significant about this, about let us make for ourselves a name. Next, please. Nimrod, therefore, was the one superintending the building of this tower, and his intention, along with those who were assisting him, was to make for ourselves a name over against the name of the Lord. That is, to make themselves God in place of the one true God. When you read that in the Hebrew, it's very clear what's being said there. As we noted previously, Shinar was the land of ancient Samaria, and this is where the oldest known written texts have been found. They date back to around 3000 BC. At the foundation of these texts, the very foundation of them, is the self-deification of man and their gods, and their gods were in essence superhuman entities who controlled all aspects of their lives and who they worshiped. Now listen very carefully. When you go back and look again at Genesis 3, and Satan said, "If you will eat of this fruit, you will be like God, knowing good and evil." In the Hebrew, the word for God is El. I forgot the gentleman who provided this board. Brother Larry, are you here tonight? I love this board, sir. I was thinking when I went back last year, I was thinking I was going to start a little ministry thing, and when I do, I'm going to get this, I guarantee you. The word for God in Hebrew is this. You can't see it, but this has lines up here that I can write on. And this is the single word for God. This word right here literally means gods. How many here speak Spanish? Anybody speak Spanish? German? English? Okay. If any of you, for example, in Spanish and German, most every other language except English, the person who's speaking is contained in the verb itself. I have to say I speak. I don't just say speak. If I said, hey, ma'am, what is your name? If I said, Carol, speak, you would think I'm giving you a command, would you not? Because I didn't say I speak, you speak, they speak, we speak. I just said speak. Not so in these languages. In Spanish, I could say hablo, hablas, or habla. And each one of those is the word for speak, but each one carries with it in the verb itself a different person. Hablo is I speak, hablas is you speak, habla is he, she, it speaks. Same thing is true in Hebrew. But now, if I said, nos hablo español, you'd think this guy's a real Mexican redneck. He doesn't even know how to talk right. I said, I speak Spanish. It doesn't make sense, does it? No. Hebrew is the same way. You're going to have the subject matched up with the verb. You're not going to have a singular subject and a plural verb. It's going to be a singular subject with a singular verb. Are you with me? Yeah. Okay. Now what's interesting is this. Genesis 1:1, we all know that, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, the word for created there is a singular verb. Okay? However, the word for God there is this, Elohim. And we know later in Genesis 1:26, the Bible says, and God said, Elohim said, let us make man in our image. Well, clearly it's referring to the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. But elsewhere, this term Elohim is used where normally you'd think El, and Elohim is the plural term, but it has a singular verb. Fascinating. Okay? Now, we come to Genesis chapter 3. Satan says, if you will eat of this fruit, you will be like God. Ki Elohim is the word that's used there. However, I believe the correct translation there is not G-O-D, but I think he said, you will be like gods. Are you with me? I'm convinced of that. I'm sure of that. I'm certain of that. Why? Because when you find the oldest known written text, which go back to ancient Samaria, I believe that the Tower of Babel and its collapse and its destruction took place sometime. Okay, and this is just my own persuasion. Sometime in the 4th millennium BC. I don't know when. I have no idea. I can't substantiate that. And the reason I believe that is because the first written text came out of Samaria, and we found them going back to around 3000, 3100, 3200 BC. Some of them can't even be translated. Prior to that, they all had one language. So they didn't really need to write because they all spoke the same thing. Boom, the language was separated sometime in the 4th millennium, and they began to write to be able to express themselves. And the first thing that we see being written is this. Operating, directing, and supervising this universe, the Sumerian theologian assumed, was a pantheon, that means a bunch, consisting of a group of living beings, man-like in form but superhuman and immortal, who, though invisible to the mortal eye, guided and controlled the cosmos in accordance with the well-laid plans and duly prescribed laws. The great realms of heaven, earth, sea, and air, the major astral bodies, sun, moon, planets, such atmospheric forces as wind, storm, tempest, family on earth, and family on earth, such natural entities as river, mountain, plain, such cultural entities as city and state, dike and ditch, field and farm, and even such implements as the pickaxe, brick, mold, and plow, each was deemed, brick mold, excuse me, each was deemed to be under the charge of one or another anthropomorphic. Anthropomorphic, that means they look like a man. They had a man form. But superhuman being who guided its activities in accordance with established rules and regulations. Folks, this is really significant. And when I was in graduate school and in my class at UCLA, we'd have people that were liberals and nothing. And so they'd all the Bible's nothing is myth. And we'd come to this thing about Genesis 3, and I would always go back to a psychological a defense of this, and I said, well, it's fascinating that this was written by poor, stupid, old, ignorant people. But I said they had an incredible grasp of human nature. And I said human nature, historically, from the oldest known written text, is all about man deifying himself. We see this in every culture. And today, the 20th century, who is one of the greatest, and I don't mean great, but I mean wonderful, but one of the greatest examples of a man who tried to deify himself? Who comes to your mind in the 20th century? Huh? Hitler! Adolf Hitler. Joseph Stalin. Mao Zedong. Saddam Hussein. These are just a few examples. With every one of those men was horror, terror, all kinds of sexual perversion, everything. Am I right? Yes. In addition, these gods had all the same desires, passions, and weaknesses of men. The Sumerian gods, as illustrated graphically by the Sumerian myths, were entirely anthropomorphic. Even the most powerful and most knowing among them were conceived as human in form, thought, and deed. Like man, they plan, act, eat, and drink. Now listen, marry and raise families, support large households, and are addicted to human passions and weaknesses. Now I want you to stop here. What is one of the primary things that if you are a Muslim and you go blow up innocent people, when you die as a martyr, what's going to happen to you if you're a man? Fascinating. What is that about? Holiness? It's about pure, unadulterated fulfillment of sexual passion and lust. Am I right? What happens to you if you're a Mormon?
Call my wives that.
No, what happens when you finally die? You become what? And what do you end up doing? And doing what? Propagating all the little gods. How? By water? No. Now, again, I'm not trying to, what I'm trying to show you, ladies and gentlemen, is this. The perversion of sex is incredible. It is destructive, it is hellish. And yet it is a battle that, as human beings, we've all faced and had to fight and struggle with. Thank God for His deliverance. But here's what I'm telling you. This is at the core of Islam. It's absolutely at the core. It comes out of this. Now, in essence, therefore, the Sumerian gods were no more than superhuman men without any restraints on their desires or ambitions. Thus, the gods' lifestyles became the pattern for the people of Samaria. And these lifestyles were based on the people's own carnal imaginations, substantiating, supporting, and giving religious sanction to their own prurient desires and lust. Now, this is a fascinating thing. Every cult that you've ever seen, they make God into who? With all their desires, basically they sanction their own perversion. Am I right? Every time. Every time. No less different with Muhammad and Islam. We're going to see some shocking things later on. Consequently, from the Sumerian culture in particular, we see the immersion of human culture into the wholehearted acceptance of idolatry, the deification of man, and unrestrained sexual license, which received religious sanction through the founders of ancient Samaria, who in turn were the descendants of Ham. Is that incredible or what? Huh? This idolatry and its accompanying sins spread throughout the ancient Near East, and that spread encompassed Ishmael and his descendants, which included the Arab peoples, and it is from the Arab peoples that Muhammad and the Islamic religion emerged. Isaac and Ishmael. We're going to see later on, probably Friday when we get into the Quran in particular, or Saturday I should say, we're going to see some fascinating things there. I mean, complete antithesis of what the Bible is. You have to understand that, folks. Satan is sly. When he tempted Eve, he said, has God said you can't eat from every tree of the garden? Well, and what he said, he tweaked it a little bit, didn't he? He said, no. She said, no, we can eat it. We just can't eat the middle one. He says, that's a bold-faced lie. So he goes from tweaking it to absolute, utter distortion. God knows when you eat of it, you know you're going to be like him. He just wants to keep something good for him. And so we see Satan's line and his pattern. And this is not religious gobbledygook, folks. This is reality. This is where we see lives being destroyed. We see families torn apart. We see what's going on in our world today. I'm not wanting to get into a political thing, but I absolutely was utterly astounded that the American people voted in a Democratic Congress. And you may be Democrat and you may not like me, that's fine. I love you and Jesus, but I'm just going to speak the truth. Now we're going to find out where these people really are. So much of that was just pure and adulterated rhetoric. But the absolute misinformation that people readily accept without knowing what really is at stake is drastic, and especially with reference to Islam. I love sharing Jesus with Muslims, but I also know what they can do, okay? And I'm always ready for them. I must tell you, I reach out to Muslims and love and share, but I don't trust a one of them, because I don't know if they're just cultural Muslims or if they're really embracing that stuff. Okay? We have an enemy here. We need to understand that. All right, moving on. The reason I emphasize this idolatrous sexual perversion that encompassed the peoples of the ancient Near East is that we find the very same thing in present-day Islam and religiously sanctioned teaching that includes marriage, divorce, martyrdom, and the treatment of unbelievers. All of that having to do with sexual perversion of some type. The reason this is so important to see and grasp is that the same satanic lie that was the foundation of the ancient Sumerian culture and religious belief system is at the core and foundation of Islamic belief and teaching, and that includes in particular the deification of man, which is the basis of man's salvation through his own supposed works of righteousness and the religiously sanctioned cover of sexual licentiousness. That's a mouthful, but it's absolutely there. As a result of the permeation of this idolatrous perversion throughout the ancient Near East, this was exactly what Abraham was facing from the beginning of his call by God. And Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, from ancient times your fathers lived beyond the river, namely Terah, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nahor. And they," what? Ooh, what other gods did they serve? The same ones that the Sumerians were serving. Are you with me? Now, Abraham is from the line of Shem, but the line of Ham was all mixed in there together. This is what's important to understand. "Then I took your father, Abraham, from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan and multiplied his descendants and gave him Isaac." Now, you're going to be fascinated when we look at the Quran and see how it twists this, because it doesn't place Isaac as the promise, it places Ishmael. Very fascinating. Next, please. The Israelites also faced this same idolatry and deification of man in Egypt with the deification of Pharaoh. From early times, the epithet Necher referred directly to the king, that is Pharaoh, as a god. Sometimes the term occurred alone, at other times it appeared with modifying or descriptive words. Another epithet from early times referred to the king as a descendant of a god, that is, son of Re. Later, the Egyptians developed other terms such as Tisht, which was an image of a god, and Pri. The latter, an expression meaning great house, and referring to the palace, was an abstraction that attributed a corporate nature to the king, much as White House can denote the President of the United States. Sometimes the king was also referred to as like Nij, a deity. Ordinarily, all these royal epithets were used in specific types of documents. So what we're seeing here, folks, this wasn't just a little thing. This is worldwide. Are you with me? I mean, we're talking about this is the nature of man back then. Consequently, when God brought the Israelites out of Egypt, all of the miracles God performed were a direct affront to Pharaoh's claim to deity. All those 10 miracles, every one of them were things that he supposedly had what's called ma'at, that is power over. And God demonstrated he had power over anything. That is, in each of these 10 areas that God effected a miracle or plague through Moses, those very areas were supposed to be under Pharaoh's deified control, but he was powerless, as his magicians attested. However, even in the face of his own impotence in being unable to abort the plagues, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and the Egyptians continued their pursuit of false deities. The same level of idolatry faced the Israelites when they entered the land of Canaan. And the Lord exhorted them to not embrace any aspect of that perverted culture. Now, this is a very important thing we're going to read here because we're going to see some gross stuff. And God was not giving this direction because he didn't have anything else better to do. Oh, just don't do this. I know you've never been exposed to this. It's because this lifestyle was everywhere. It was replete with this. This was the norm when they came into Canaan. You have to understand that. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. Now, we're going to get all these you shall nots. You shall not do as what was done in the land of Egypt where you live, nor are you to do what is done in the land of Canaan where I am bringing you. You shall not walk in their statutes." All of Egypt is primarily of the lineage of who? Ham. All right, keep that in mind. You are to perform my judgments and keep my statutes to live in accord with them. I am the Lord your God. So you shall keep my statutes, my judgments, by which a man may live if he does them. I am the Lord. None of you shall approach any blood relative of his to uncover nakedness. I am the Lord. What's he talking about? You won't go have sex, either male or homosexual or heterosexual or pedophilia or beast or anything. All right. Not beast, because we'll get to that in a minute here. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, that is, the nakedness of your mother. Incest. She is your mother. You're not to uncover her nakedness. Why is he telling them not to do this? Because they were doing it everywhere. Now, we don't have time to go into all these other extra biblical texts. I just gave you a few examples, but it's replete, believe me. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness. That is, basically, if you'd married somebody else, because they had, many wives and children by them. The nakedness of your sister, again, another form of incest. Your father's daughter or your mother's daughter. Whether born at home or born outside, their nakedness you shall not uncover. This could be his stepsister or his actual real sister. The nakedness of your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter, their nakedness you shall not uncover, for their nakedness is yours. The nakedness of your father's wife's daughter. In other words, your father's married another woman, had a daughter by her, you won't have anything to do with her either. Born to your father. Keep this in mind. This is very important reference to Islam, we'll see later. She is your sister. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister, that is your aunt. She is your father's blood relative. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, for she is your mother's blood relative. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother. You shall not approach his wife. She is your aunt. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. Ooh, she is your son's wife. You shall not uncover her nakedness. Highlight that. Very, very important. We're going to find out with reference to Muhammad. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It is your brother's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of a woman and of her daughter, nor shall you take her son's daughter of her daughter or her daughter's daughter to uncover her nakedness. They are blood relatives. It is lewdness. You shall not marry a woman in addition to her sister's rival while she is alive to uncover her nakedness. Also, you shall not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness during her menstrual impurity. You shall not have intercourse with your neighbor's wife to be defiled with her. Neither shall you give any of your offspring to offer them to Molech, child sacrifice, nor shall you profane the name of God. I am the Lord. Basically, verse 21 in some ways might be considered postnatal abortion, quite honestly. You shall not lie with a male as one lies with a female. It is an abomination, homosexuality or lesbianism. Also, you shall not have intercourse with any animal to be defiled with it, nor shall any woman stand before an animal to mate with it. It is a perversion. This was not just because he didn't have anything else better to say, guys and gals. This is because this was going on. Bestiality was a common practice back then. I believe it's going to be the same here in this country, unfortunately. I don't know how common it's going to be, but it's going to happen because people, once they've done everything, all their whole life is about sensuality. Their lives are given over. There are no limits that people will not go to. The depths of perversion are incredible. All right. Do not defile yourselves by any of these things, for by all these the nations which I am casting out before you become defiled. For the land has become defiled there. I'll visit its punishment upon it. So the land has spewed out its inhabitants. But as for you, you are to keep my statutes, my judgments, and shall not do any of these abominations, neither the native nor the alien who sojourns among you. For the men of the land who have been before you have done all these abominations, and the land has become defiled, so that the land may not spew you out, should you defile it, as it has spewed out the nation which has been before you. Whoever does any of these abominations, those persons who do so shall be cut off from among their people. Thus you are to keep my charge, that you do not practice any of the abominable customs which have been practiced before you, so as not to defile yourselves with them. I am the Lord your God. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I was speaking this past summer in Colorado Springs at a church and talking about this. I had a lady come up to me who was Afghan. She said she'd been in America for many years. She says, you know, I grew up as a Muslim. She said, I can tell you that behind those burqas, you cannot imagine the sexual perversion, the sexual sin, the sexual exploitation that goes on. She says it's incredible. They try to hide it with a form of, a cover of religious sanction. She says, but it's only a cover to basically give free rein to their own licentiousness. She says, I know, I lived in it, I saw it. So this is what we're dealing with. That's why they can go blow up and kill people. That's why they look forward to going to heaven 72. That's sick, isn't it? And we're going to find out a lot more things. All right. However, as we know from Scripture, the Israelites did not obey the above exhortation, and the result was they were ultimately displaced from the land and lost the blessings God had promised them. Okay, we're going to go a few more. Now, we'll stop right here. We're going to go now to an overview of biblical soteriology, but let me stop here for just a minute. We'll take a little break, but does anybody have any questions you'd like to ask about this first section we've been over? Yes, ma'am. And your name, ma'am, is?
Evie.
Evie, what, ma'am?
Evie Ager.
Evie Ager?
Agers. I would like to know which book and chapter that last quote was from, because I didn't catch it.
Oh, go back, please. Can you go back, Brother Dave? Keep going back. It's in It's in Leviticus chapter 18. I should have it. That is the apex of ignorance. I didn't do that. That's horrible. I'm glad you corrected me on that.
Leviticus 18?
Yes, ma'am. Leviticus chapter 18. That's pretty pathetic. I'll go back and thank you for correcting me on that. But that's Leviticus chapter 18. Anybody else? Any other questions? Well, let's stand and take a little break here.